Surah 30. Ar-Rum. Context. Period of revelation. The period of the revelation of this surah is determined absolutely by the historical event mentioned at the outset of this surah. It says,
"The Romans have been defeated in the nearest land."
In those days, the Byzantine-occupied territories adjacent to Arabia were Jordan, Syria and Palestine, and in these territories, the Romans were completely overpowered by the Persians in 615 CE. Therefore it can be said with absolute certainty that this surah was sent down in the same year, and this was the year in which the migration to Abyssinia took place. The historical background. The prediction made in the initial verses of this surah is one of the most outstanding evidences of the Quran's being the Word of God, and the Prophet Muhammad's being a true messenger of God. Let us have a look at the historical background relevant to the verses. 8 years before the Prophet's advent as a prophet, the Byzantine Emperor Maurice was overthrown by Phocas, who captured the throne and became king. Phocas first executed the emperor's 5 sons in front of the emperor, and then had the emperor executed as well. Their heads were put on display on a public road in Constantinople. A few days after this, he had the empress and her 3 daughters also put to death. The event provided Khosrow-Parvez, the Sassanid king of Persia, a good moral excuse to attack Byzantium. For Emperor Maurice had been his benefactor, with his help, he had got the throne of Persia. Therefore he declared that he would avenge his godfathers and his children's murder upon Phocas, the usurper. So he started war against Byzantium in 603 CE. Within a few years of putting the Phocas armies to rout in succession, he reached Edessa, modern Urfa in Asia Minor on the one front, and Aleppo and Antioch in Syria on the other. When the Byzantine ministers saw that Phocas could not save the country, they sought the African governor's help, who sent his son Heraclius to Constantinople with a strong fleet. Phocas was immediately deposed, and Heraclius made emperor. He treated Phocas as he had treated Maurice. This happened in 610 CE, the year the prophet was appointed to prophethood. The moral excuse for which Khosrow-Parvez had started the war was no more valid after the deposition and death of Phocas. Had the objective of his war really been to avenge the murder of his ally Phocas for his cruelty, he would have come to terms with the new emperor after the death of Phocas. However, he continued the war and proclaimed it as a battle between Zoroastrianism and Christianity. The sympathies of the Christian sects, for example the Nestorians and Jacobians, etc., which had been excommunicated by the Roman ecclesiastical authority and tyrannized for years, also went with the Magian Zoroastrian invaders, and the Jews also joined hands with them, so much so that the number of the Jews who enlisted in Khosrow's army rose up to 26,000. Heraclius could not stop this storm. The very first news that he received from the east after ascending the throne was that of the Persian occupation of Antioch. After this, Damascus fell in 613 CE. Then in 614 CE the Persians occupying Jerusalem played havoc with the Christian world. 90,000 Christians were massacred, and the Holy Sepulchre was desecrated. The original cross on which, according to the Christian belief, Jesus had died, was seized and carried to Madain. The chief priest Zechariah was taken prisoner, and all the important churches of the city were destroyed. How puffed up was Khosrow-Parvez at this victory can be judged from the letter that he wrote to Heraclius from Jerusalem. He wrote,
"From Khosrow, the greatest of all gods, the master of the whole world, to Heraclius his most wretched and most stupid servant, you say that you have trust in your Lord. Why didn't then your Lord save Jerusalem from me?"
Within a year after this victory, the Persian armies overran Jordan, Palestine and the whole of the Sinai Peninsula, and reached the frontiers of Egypt. In those very days, another conflict of a far greater historical consequence was going on in Mecca. The believers in one God, under the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad, were fighting for their existence, against the followers of polytheism, Shirk, under the command of the chiefs of the Quraysh. And the conflict had reached such a stage, that in 615 CE a substantial number of the Muslims had to leave their homes, and take refuge with the Christian kingdom of Abyssinia, which was an ally of the Byzantine Empire. In those days the Sassanid victories against Byzantium were the talk of the town, and the pagans of Mecca were delighted and were taunting the Muslims to the effect,
"Look, the fire worshippers of Persia are winning victories, and the Christian believers in revelation and prophethood are being routed everywhere. Likewise, we, the idol worshippers of Arabia, will exterminate you and your religion."
These were the conditions when the Surah of the Quran was revealed, and in it, a prediction was made, saying,
"The Romans have been defeated in the nearest land, but they, after their defeat, will overcome within 3 to 9 years. To God belongs the command before and after, and that day the believers will rejoice in the victory of God. He gives victory to whom He wills, and He is the exalted in might, the merciful."
It contained not one, but two predictions: first, the Romans shall be victorious, and second, the Muslims also shall win a victory at the same time. Apparently, there was not a remote chance of the fulfillment of either prediction in the next few years. On the one hand, there were a handful of the Muslims who were being beaten and tortured in Mecca, and even after 8 years of this prediction being made, there appeared no chance of their victory and domination. On the contrary, the Romans were losing more and more ground every day. By 619 CE, the whole of Egypt had passed into Sassanid hands, and the Magian armies had reached as far as Tripoli. In Asia Minor they beat and pushed back the Romans to Bosporus, and in 617 CE, they captured Chalcedon, modern Kadikoy, just opposite Constantinople. The emperor sent an envoy to Khosrow, praying that he was ready to have peace on any terms. However, he replied,
"I shall not give protection to the emperor until he is brought in chains before me and gives up obedience to his crucified God, and adopts submission to the fire god."
At last, the emperor became so depressed by defeat that he decided to leave Constantinople and shift to Carthage, modern Tunis. The conditions were such that no one could even imagine that the Byzantine Empire would ever gain an upper hand over Persia. Not to speak of gaining domination, no one could hope that the empire under the circumstances would even survive. When these verses of the Quran were sent down, the disbelievers of Mecca made great fun of them, and Ubay bin Khalaf bet Abu Bakr 10 camels if the Romans became victorious within 3 years. When the Prophet came to know of the bet, he said,
"The Quran has used the words bidi sinin, and the word bid in Arabic applies to a number up to 10. Therefore, make the bet for 10 years and increase the number of camels to 100.
So, Abu Bakr spoke to Ubay again, and bet 100 camels for 10 years. In 622 CE, as the Prophet migrated to Medina, the Emperor Heraclius set off quietly for Trabzon from Constantinople via the Black Sea, and started preparations to attack Persia from the rear. For this he asked the church for money. Pope Sergius lent him the church collections on interest, in a bid to save Christianity from Zoroastrianism. Heraclius started his counterattack in 623 CE from Armenia. The following year, in 624 CE, he entered Azerbaijan and destroyed Clarumia, the birthplace of Zoroaster, and ravaged the principal fire temple of Persia. Great are the powers of God. This was the very year when the Muslims achieved a decisive victory at Badr for the first time against the polytheists. Thus, both the predictions made in Surah ar-Rum were fulfilled simultaneously within the stipulated period of 10 years. The Byzantine forces continued to press the Persians hard, and in the decisive battle at Nineveh 627 CE they dealt a severe blow. They captured the royal residence of Dastagerd, and then pressing forward reached right opposite to Ctesiphon, capital of Persia in those days. In 628 CE, in an internal revolt, Khosrow-Parvez was imprisoned and 18 of his sons were executed in front of him, and a few days later he himself died in the prison. This was the year when the peace treaty of Hudaybiyah was concluded, which the Quran has termed as the supreme victory, and in this very year, Khosrow's son, Qubad II, gave up all the occupied Roman territories and made peace with Byzantium. After this, no one could have any doubt about the truth of the prophecy of the Quran, with the result that most of the Arab polytheists accepted Islam. The heirs of Ubay bin Khalaf lost their bet and had to give 100 camels to Abu Bakr Siddiq. He took them before the Prophet, who ordered that they be given away in charity, because the bet had been made at a time when gambling had not yet been forbidden by the Sharia. Now it was forbidden. Therefore, the bet was allowed to be accepted from the belligerent disbelievers, but instruction given that it should be given away in charity, and should not be brought in personal use. The theme and subject matter of this surah. The discourse begins with the theme, that the Romans have been overcome and the people believe that the empire is about to collapse. But the fact is that within a few years, the tables will be turned and the vanquished will again become victorious. This introductory theme contains the great truth, that a person is only accustomed to seeing what is apparent and visible. Often, this habit can lead to misunderstandings and miscalculations. This is where a person is liable to make wrong judgments. And what a great error to place your trust only upon that which is visible and apparent in this world. Then, from the question of the conflict between Byzantium and Persia, the direction of the discourse turns to the theme of the hereafter. Up to verse 27, God explains that the hereafter is possible as well as rational and necessary. For man to have a stable and balanced system of life, it is necessary to live the present life based on your faith in the hereafter, otherwise you will continue to commit grievous errors, as a result of placing your trust upon what is apparent to you. In this connection, the signs of the universe which have been presented as evidence to prove the doctrine of the hereafter are precisely the same, which support the doctrine of monotheism.
Tawheed.
Therefore, from verse 28 onwards, the discourse turns to the affirmation of monotheism and the refutation of polytheism.
Shirk.
And it is stressed that the natural way of life for a person is none else but to serve one God exclusively. Polytheism is opposed to the nature of the universe, in the sense that there could only be one Creator and Lord presiding over it. Similarly, polytheism is adverse to the innate nature of man. Therefore, whenever man adopts this deviation, corruption appears. In conclusion, a parable has been presented, that just as the dead earth comes back to life by a shower of rain, so is the case with God giving life to the dead. When God sends a shower of His mercy in the form of revelation and prophethood, it also gives a new life to humankind, and causes them to grow, develop and flourish. Surah 30. Ar-Rum. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Alif, Lam, Mim. The Romans have been defeated, in the nearest land. But they, after their defeat, will overcome within 3 to 9 years. To God belongs the command, decree, before and after. And that day the believers will rejoice in the victory of God. He gives victory to whom He wills, and He is the exalted in might, the merciful. It is the promise of God. God does not fail in His promise, but most of the people do not know. They know what is apparent of the worldly life, but they of the hereafter are unaware. Do they not contemplate within themselves? God has not created the heavens and the earth, and what is between them except in truth, and for a specified term. And indeed many of the people, in the matter of the meeting with their Lord, are disbelievers. Have they not traveled through the earth, and observed how was the end of those before them? They were greater than them in power, and they plowed or excavated the earth, and built it up more than they, the Meccans, had built it up, and their messengers came to them with clear evidences. And God would not ever have wronged them, but but they were wronging themselves. Then the end of those who did evil was the worst consequence, because they denied the signs of God and used to ridicule them. God begins creation, then he will repeat it, then to him you will be returned. And the day the hour appears, the criminals will be in despair. And there will not be for them among their alleged partners any intercessors, and they will then be disbelievers in their partners. And the day the hour appears, that day they will become separated. And as for those who had believed and done righteous deeds, they will be in a garden of paradise, delighted. But as for those who disbelieved, and denied our verses, and the meeting of the hereafter, those will be brought into the punishment to remain. So exalted is God when you reach the evening, and when you reach the morning. And to him is due all praise throughout the heavens and the earth. And exalted is he at night, and when you are at noon. He brings the living out of the dead, and brings the dead out of the living, and brings to life the earth after its lifelessness. And thus will you be brought out, and of his signs, is that he created you from dust. Then suddenly, you were human beings, dispersing throughout the earth. And of his signs, is that he created for you from yourselves mates, that you may find tranquility in them, and he placed between you love and mercy. Indeed in that are signs for a people who give thought. And of his signs, is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the diversity of your languages and your colors. Indeed in that are signs for those of knowledge. And of his signs, is your sleep by night and day, and your seeking of his bounty. Indeed in that are signs for a people who listen. And of his signs, is that he shows you the lightning, causing fear and aspiration, and he sends down rain from the sky, by which he brings to life the earth, after its death. Indeed in that are signs for a people who use reason. And of his signs, is that the heaven and the earth stand, remain, by his command. Then when he calls you, with a single call from the earth, immediately you will come forth. And to him belongs whoever is in the heavens and the earth. All are to him, devoutly obedient. And it is he who begins creation, then he repeats it, and that is even easier for him. To him belongs the highest description, attribute, in the heavens and the earth. And he is the exalted in might, the wise. He presents to you an example from yourselves. Do you have among those whom your right hands possess slaves, any partners, in what we have provided for you? So that you are equal therein, and would fear them as your fear of one another within a partnership? Thus do we detail the verses for a people who use reason. But those who wrong follow their own desires without knowledge. Then who can guide one, whom God has sent astray? And for them there are no helpers. So direct your face, yourself, toward the religion, inclining to truth. Adhere to the fitrah of God, upon which he has created all people. No change should there be in the creation of God. That is the correct religion, but most of the people do not know. Adhere to it, turning in repentance to him, and fear him, and establish prayer, and do not be of those who associate others with God, or of those who have divided their religion and become sects. Every faction rejoicing in what it has, and when adversity touches the people, they call upon their Lord, turning in repentance to him. Then when he lets them taste mercy from him, at once a party of them associate others with their Lord, so that they will deny what we have granted them. Then enjoy yourselves, for you are going to know. Or have we sent down to them an authority, and it speaks of what they were associating with him? And when we let the people taste mercy, they rejoice therein. But if evil afflicts them for what their hands have put forth, immediately they despair. Do they not see that God extends provision for whom he wills and restricts it? Indeed in that are signs for a people who believe. So give the relative his right, as well as the needy and the traveler. That is best for those who desire the countenance of God, and it is they who will be the successful. And whatever you give for interest, advantage, to increase within the wealth of people, will not increase with God. But what you give in zakat, desiring the countenance of God, those are the ones who shall get manifold reward. God is the one who created you, then provided for you, then will cause you to die, and then will give you life. Are there any of your partners who does anything of that? Exalted is he, and high above what they associate with him. Corruption has appeared throughout the land and sea, by reason of what the hands of people have earned. So he, God, may let them taste part of the consequence of what they have done, that perhaps they will return to righteousness. Say, O Muhammad, travel through the land and observe how was the end of those before. Most of them were associators of others with God. So direct your face, self, toward the correct religion before a day comes from God, of which there is no repelling. That day, they will be divided. Whoever disbelieves, upon him is the consequence of his disbelief. And whoever does righteousness, they are for themselves preparing, that he may reward those who have believed and done righteous deeds, out of his bounty. Indeed, he does not like the disbelievers. And of his signs, is that he sends the winds as bringers of good tidings, and to let you taste his mercy, rain, and so the ships may sail, at his command, and so you may seek of his bounty, and perhaps you will be grateful. And we have already sent messengers before you, to their peoples, and they came to them with clear evidences. Then we took retribution, from those who committed crimes, and incumbent upon us was to help the believers. It is God who sends the winds, and they stir the clouds and spread them in the sky. However he wills, and he makes them fragments, so you see the rain emerge from within them. And when he causes it to fall, upon whom he wills of his servants, immediately they rejoice. Although they were, before it was sent down upon them, before that, in despair. So observe the effects of the mercy of God, how he gives life to the earth after its lifelessness. Indeed, that same one will give life to the dead, and he is over all things competent. But if we should send a bad wind, and they saw their crops turned yellow, they would remain thereafter disbelievers. So indeed, you will not make the dead hear, nor will you make the deaf hear the call, when they turn their backs, retreating. And you cannot guide the blind, away from their error. You will only make hear, those who believe in our verses, so they are Muslims in submission to God. God is the one who created you from weakness, then made after weakness, strength, then made after strength, weakness and white hair. He creates what he wills, and he is the knowing, the competent. And the day the hour appears, the criminals will swear, they had remained but an hour. Thus they were deluded. But those who were given knowledge and faith will say, you remain the extent of God's decree until the day of resurrection. And this is the day of resurrection, but you did not use to know. So that day, their excuse will not benefit those who wronged, nor will they be asked to appease God. And we have certainly presented to the people in this Quran, from every kind of example. But O Muhammad, if you should bring them a sign, the disbelievers will surely say, you believers are but falsifiers. Thus does God seal the hearts of those who do not know, so be patient. Indeed, the promise of God is true. Do not let those who have no certainty weaken your firmness.